What's on your radar today, Kim?
Well, Elon Musk took to Twitter and asked the question many of us have been asking. How is it we still don't know who was on Jeffrey Epstein's client list? Here's his tweet. Only thing more remarkable than the DOJ not leaking the list is that no one in the media cares. Doesn't that seem odd? Well, I care, Elon, and it is odd. There are many leaks that happen each year, so why not this one? In fact, in 2017, Jeff Sessions revealed that the DOJ had 27 open leak investigations of classified information. We read about leaks happening fairly often, and it's usually information of public interest, like when James Comey leaked his notes from his meetings with Trump, or the recent SCOTUS leak regarding Roe v. Wade. Well, the public is pretty interested in Epstein's list, so why hasn't someone leaked it? Well, the DOJ might say there's just no such list of names to leak. They might claim Epstein didn't keep a detailed list and that figuring out who were his clients was a matter of piecing together bits of information from victim testimony, eyewitnesses, flight logs, and photographs. Unlike Heidi Fleiss, Epstein wasn't in the business of collecting money, so there's no need for him to keep a little black book or, in Fleiss's case, a 28-page red Gucci planner. But is that true? Maybe he wasn't collecting money, but perhaps he was collecting something like blackmail. And if he was collecting blackmail, like his victims claim and like many of us suspect, wouldn't the blackmail have been found by police or investigators? And if it was found, wouldn't there be a list of names from that found blackmail? And what about Ghislaine Maxwell? She was found guilty of several counts of sex trafficking and is scheduled to be sentenced later this month. You can't sex traffic without having people to sex traffic too. So certainly the DOJ has those names. So if the names exist, there's a list, or at least a file. And if a list or a file exists, why out of all of the leaks we hear about each year, hasn't this one leaked? Either the list doesn't exist, is being held by investigators and they're somehow able to keep a tight lid on some of the most sought after information of this decade, or something else happened. Now, podcaster Adam Davidson gives a little insight into maybe why we aren't hearing more names drop. In a Twitter thread, he writes, I spent 2 years working on the Jeffrey Epstein podcast, Broken. I became close with many of his victims and learned a lot of stuff that for annoying legal reasons we can't publish. He goes on to say, I knew that rich and powerful men can get away with a lot. I didn't realize just how much they can get away with and just how much the entire system, courts, journalism, prosecutor, works inadvertently and deliberately to reinforce their impunity. I think we all know that, say, Bill Gates and Clinton probably were up to no good. At the very best, they knowingly spent time and casted their halo on a man they knew was a serial rapist of children, though hard to believe it ended there. Yet they're given heroic treatment every week in the media, paying no price. Jeffrey Epstein is not some outlier, some freak who is now dead and best forgotten. He represents something essential in all of our systems of authority, law, courts, higher education, nonprofits, media, etc., that is there right now today. When I think of the unbelievably brave women like Virginia, like VRS Virginia, Pink Pepto-Bismol, and so many others who were dismissed, slut-shamed, etc., while cowards and evildoers were lauded, I feel like something deep is broken in the world we live in. I say all of this a few weeks before Ghislaine Maxwell is sentenced, and the world will likely put aside the Epstein story forever. Some weird set of crimes that two awful people committed. The bad guys won. They pulled it off. They raped children or sat by and watched others do so. They used their elite connections and access to power. The weird thing is we all know what they did and we don't seem to care. Oh, people maybe care. They just don't want to be ruined. In fact, Adam acknowledges his own risk in reply messages to others saying, there is a real likelihood that my life will be ruined. I could write a lot of stuff about a lot of people without worrying, but not these guys. So maybe there is a list to leak, and maybe someone inside the DOJ has tried to leak it. But maybe it's news organizations who won't publish it. With the amount of public interest in this case, and yet we still can't get any more names than the ones revealed by mostly Virginia Giuffre, this once again reiterates that in the entire Epstein saga, there seems to be a showcase of the powerful protecting the powerful. So what do you think? Brianna, I'm going to ask you this one because you're the lawyer here, so look, leaks happen all the time. I know that it's supposed to definitely not be leaked. It's not supposed to happen, but people definitely want to know who these names are. I mean, what do you think from like a legal perspective, what maybe is going on? Like, why are they at least not releasing the names legally, if not leaking them?
I'm sorry, but I can't help but draw a connection to the recent Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial and the threat of talking even in pretty vague terms about abuse that you're aware of, abuse that you perceive yourself to have endured in the past. to the point that you made about the podcaster who did a deep dive on this, he's spoken to victims. The stories are there. There are people, with evidence that is corroborated, at least in the public sphere, who are unwilling to come forward, because if you cannot prove at a fairly high standard that these things happen, then you are subject to defamation claims. And even if you are ultimately not successful in those defamation claims, who has the money to spend defending those claims once they're actually leveraged? And that is why people have these concerns about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, because they are, again, an example of rich and powerful people who are able to use the system to kind of litigate their personal and private dispute in the court of public opinion because they have the means to do so. Whereas other people who are smaller, like these victims, who don't have the resources, are basically forced into silence. I think that's concerning.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brianna. I actually do. Go ahead,
Well,
Kim.
I just wanted to just mention that, so what's interesting about that is that there is then a possibility that the DOJ has this list and they have maybe released to some media people, these are the people we're investigating. I mean, I'm not sure really what they may or may not have said, but let's say if they did say this, then it's very possible that media organizations don't even want to touch it. That they say, we don't even want to go there. These people are too rich, too powerful, they're going to come after us legally. Like, as you mentioned, in Amber Heard's situation. And so we're not going to even begin to touch
Well, but
these.
in that case, I think they could, because they could just say the DOJ is investigating these people. That would be a fact, if it was a fact, without necessarily suggesting any of the underlying, because if you assert that the underlying accusations are true or there's some validity to them, then you could open yourself up to liability. But if you just said these are the people being investigated,
Right.
But not everybody investigated by the DOJ or the FBI or the government is guilty necessarily.
Well, there's also the threat of witness intimidation. I mean, we have Epstein, dying in captivity. I mean, there are all of these things when you're dealing with people at this scale of affluence, when you're talking about some of the richest people on the entire planet and most powerful and influential people, royal family, Bill Gates, people like this that are implicated. I think there's probably a legitimate concern from the DOJ that leaking these kinds of names could lead to interference with the trial that ultimately doesn't, help the interest of justice also.
I wonder if they're having some trouble with the victims, obviously young at the time of the alleged crimes, might have trouble recalling, who was who in various scenarios, or if they give, conflicting, they say it one way and then, actually it was like this, then, that makes that there's a loss of confidence sometimes in investigators. And if that behavior is known by media people, that will really spook them, because then they think their risk of liability will be greater. So it could be something like that.
Yeah, it might not even be liability at all. I mean, they just might be afraid of other sorts of consequences. These people are very powerful. So it might not even boil down to, well, we're afraid of being sued. Yeah, you're right. You could maybe overcome that by, well, we just got this from the DOJ. This is factual. This is who they're investigating. But if that's not what you're afraid of, if you're not worried about them suing you, but you're afraid of them collapsing you, them ruining you, them coming, well, you ending up dead in a jail cell, like two people who are connected heavily to these crimes. You've got Epstein, obviously, who allegedly hung himself, and you have Jean-Luc Brunel, the modeling agent, who also allegedly hung himself and was found dead this past February in his jail cell. So you've got the guy who is potentially providing the girls, the models, and then you have Epstein, who we all know what he was doing, and they're both dead now. So this is, I mean, so I can understand
why
why
most people in the media are
afraid.
afraid I think they're afraid of lawsuits more than dying, if that makes any sense. Certainly their bosses, their editors, the people who have to sign off on certain decisions. And because, sometimes because of how easy it can be, it's increasingly easy to really ensnare a person or an organization for just not getting every single thing exactly 100% right beyond any sort of doubt.
I don't know about that. I don't know if they're worried about lawsuits when it comes to this particular. I mean, yes, of course they're always worried about lawsuits, but I think it's something much bigger than that. I don't know if it's death necessarily that they're really truly worried about, but people like Jean-Luc Brunel and Epstein, they were very intimately involved in this entire scandal. It's beyond a scandal in these crimes. They were intimately involved. They knew who the girls were. They knew who the men were. They provided all of it. They facilitated it. So it's yes, they ended up dead, but other people would just end up ruined. And I think a lot of people are worried about, I think there's a lot of powerful people in this country that are much more worried about losing everything than a lawsuit.
Maybe. I've covered, in my role as a journalist, I've covered some very salacious things. And in the times where I've been thwarted in reporting something I've really wanted to report, that's a salacious topic, it's always been because someone, an editor or a supervisor says, we think you're right. We're very confident, but we can't take the risk for liability, not for because they'll come after us, or not because anything like that. It's the liability. That's been what it's been in my case. I know a lot of journalists who operate that way. Obviously, this is a slightly different scenario because people have actually died under sketchy circumstances, but that is really what holds a lot of journalists back generally.
Or maybe the boss is involved. I mean, after all, it was a very powerful list of people. So
everybody's involved. There's nobody not involved except for the three of us. So that's why we're so confused. All right. Thank you, Kim. We'll have more Rising right after this.